Welcome to the new and improved Configure It Done podcast. The Configure It Done podcast is now a place where we interview senior thought leaders in the SAP space across Australia and New Zealand, and the aim is to tap into their knowledge so we can pass on their insights to the listening SAP community. Please subscribe to the podcast and like, share and comment across Castos, YouTube, Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
This podcast is in partnership with the Black Dog Institute, who aim to create a mentally healthier world for everyone. If you wish to donate to the cause, please click the link below.
Welcome to season 6 of the Configure It Done podcast, and Bethany, you're back on.
I am. So we have Jonathan Pepper with us today. So Jonathan is the founder of Maintain, who specializes in technology project management and assurance across SAP and other technologies, but we'll be focusing on SAP today. And he has some brilliant viewpoints on SAP and S/4HANA and some very specific ways to ensure the best delivery possible, basically. So that's why we have him on the podcast today.
Perfect. And thank you for coming on, John.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, we're going to dive straight in. I know Bethany and yourself were talking, John, around S4 projects and in particular them getting stuck at the moment. I know it's a very topical topic at the moment in the market. But what's your thoughts on the failure to launch a project, or why is it getting stuck?
Yeah, good question. I think some of it is specific to SAP, but it's probably more industry wide. So you look at your typical reasons for projects getting stuck, and they're things ranging from lack of resources, and whether that's personnel resources, capacity, capability, whether it's funding, whether it's the actual technology stack. And then you get into like internal political challenges between organizations. So, a person inside a company wants SAP, someone wants Microsoft. So you get a lot of that. Unclear project scope, poor project planning, resistance to change, all of those very, very typical reasons that have been around for years and years and years. I see that a lot. But I think one of the biggest reasons or challenges technology projects are getting stuck these days is because of the increasing options that businesses have to implement technology. So the way I draw it out is if you wind back 15 years, that's when the first iPhone was released. So it was released in 2007. Kind of hard to remember a life without iPhones. So you go all the way back to there, and the options to implement technology projects was always on-premise. So there wasn't the cloud concept. It was always on-premise. There wasn't really software as a service. So you installed the infrastructure, you installed the application on top of that infrastructure, and then you went and rolled out and deployed an application. And I think so. That's one of the key considerations is the landscape since back then in 2005s and 2010s. The landscape has significantly changed. And a part of that,
it's almost like there's too many areas for any one person to focus on. So we've got these key decision makers sitting at the top, and there's so much information. It's like, how do you actually have just a few people decide on all of that?
That's spot on, because if you look at the options now, and now, so we're not on premise, we're all cloud, it's all software as a service. If you want to implement an application or a business process, an application to support a business process, you have an option of 15 or 25 different products on the market, right? You don't any longer have, okay, if I'm going to do something with reliability centered maintenance, I'm going to use that product. If I'm going to do something with procurement, I will use that product. It's so vast and so varied as to what is available. So that's I think it makes it really hard for organizations to make the decision as to which path to choose. And I did touch earlier on the concept of internal political changes, and I think it becomes like a religious debate inside an organization. Are we going to be a Microsoft house? Are we going to be a Google house? Are we going to be an SAP house? Yeah, and I think, and I've seen organizations, all roads in an RFP process point to vendor X, and someone comes and makes a decision to go to vendor Y, and the people at the shop floor they're pulling their hair out because they just can't understand why we made a decision to implement, vendor Y versus vendor X. So, yeah, I see that more and more. The other interesting one I'll jump into is the organization's requirement now to deal with scalability, stability, company profitability, cyber risk, disaster recovery, performance testing, all of those components of a software as a service application, or even like a mum and pop shop, right? So you can have a mum and pop shop application provider that almost appears from feature functions as rich, if not better, usability as rich, if not better than a big SAP. But the question is, do they have the proven, demonstrated backbone that an SAP or other big organization has?
That's
Yeah.
really interesting because one trend that I've noticed is so I went into SAP recruitment 7 years ago, and then best of breed was like the buzzword. All anybody was talking about was best of breed, and it seemed very new because before that it was wall-to-wall SAP, and then best of breed was kind of the topic at the forefront of everybody's minds. And then now I don't hear it spoken about as often anymore, and I don't know if that's because that's just become commonplace or because there is less of it now. Because what I'm seeing now isn't even best of breed; it's more just stuck. Like there's just a lot of projects that just don't move forward at all, whether it be wall-to-wall SAP or best of breed in the different areas. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think a lot of that comes down to, the organization's ability to mobilize a project. So do they have the in-house skills and experience to prepare and mobilize that project? Often they don't. And often there's those classical factors around poor planning, resistance to change, internal political challenges, those items which actually stop the ability to proceed. And I think if you look at the lack of capability or the lack of resources or the lack of investment in that upfront prepare activities to mobilize a process, it often seems counterintuitive to spend a lot of money on starting a project. But if you do start a project very well and you're able to get it through all of the stage gates of an organization's approval process, you can often set it up for success for the delivery organization to deliver it.
Mm.
So I think that's a big thing. Just to the best of breed topic, there's a sticker shock often associated with large scale ERPs versus small scale best of breeds as well. So you might see a much smaller price tag on a smaller implementation of a smaller bit of capability. But when you look at an all-encompassing ERP, the sticker shock it's much bigger. So I know that starts to be a discussion in the boardrooms of, what if I'm going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on implementing this big IT system? Can I actually go and buy some more trucks to ship stock? Can I go and invest that in my assets and my plants to create revenue? So there is often that trade-off between the sticker shock of the cost of these IT applications, which goes on to the other theme of capability. So capability is expensive. It does cost money to bring in the right capability. Again, another sticker shock concept. It appears as though it costs you more money up front, but we all know when you've been in the SAP game for a long time, high caliber, high capable resources are worth their weight in gold because they get you out of a stickle. They get you right where you need to be.
Yeah, buy cheap, buy twice. We've seen that so many times with programs that have gone with cheaper resources or resources not up to the caliber of some, and the project just fails and they have to. It's a bit of a disaster recovery to come in and fix it.
Which is more expensive, yeah. And then another issue I see a lot, because you were talking about sticker shock before, is there's often this kind of, or you talked about it being, it almost feels religious. There is kind of this us versus them mentality when you've got, say, a company that's been SAP, for a decade, and then we have somebody new in the C-suite come in, or even somebody new as part of the even middle management, and they've got different visions and a different understanding outside of SAP. So you've got those that understand SAP that are like, this is what it costs. It's a massive technology. It's expensive. And then those come in and say, well, if we just go with this technology, it's a lot cheaper. So why can't you make your SAP resources cheaper? Like there's a complete disconnect between what the cost is and the benefits of each. And then it just ends up in this cycle of nothingness, which is a lot of what we're seeing right now. Nothing moving forward.
Yeah, I see that a lot too, and I see then the challenge between you know, classical technology resources versus SAP technology resources. There is a premium in the market for SAP technology resources.
Yeah.
Typically, those resources have a lot of experience and they have a lot of skill to, you know, to implement a very complex application. And yeah, it's not always understood. But look, a lot of the senior leaders in these organisations have been around for a long time as well. So they get it. It's whether it cascades down to the, you know, the level between senior management and lower mid-level management to understand that concept. And often across to HR or across to procurement. So typically the technology professionals get it. But when you actually feed it through an organisation and the procurement team doesn't understand it, or the HR team doesn't understand it, why they're so expensive, it's challenging. And look, it's I have this concept of minimum viable capability and minimal viable capacity. So you can't just throw a whole lot of incapable people on a project and expect that because you've got a lot of them, the project will be successful. And there's a couple of laws around that, right? There's Brooks Law, which actually says something around the lines of is adding manpower to a project will not actually result in the project delivering quicker and better. It often results in a further delay. So that's the concept. If you don't put the right capability in there, you're not going to solve the complex challenges and the complex issues. But then there's a balance. There's a balance of high caliber and sort of middle level resources as well.
You're talking our language now, John, around resources. In Australia and New Zealand, there's 13,500 SAP resources. And letting you into a little secret, there's only 4,500 that we would deem 4,500 that we would deem to be of a high caliber. So there is fundamentally a lack of resources in Australia and New Zealand. But how would you define high caliber? What does a high caliber consultant look like to you?
Yeah, it's I mean, you touched on it a little bit already. There's a community of 10,000 resources. There's five that are very solid, 5,000 that are solid. So this SAP community, it's very small, very, very small. Most of the resources in that community, especially in Australia and New Zealand, will know of each other or know someone that knows someone. And it's evident through LinkedIn, right? You look at a first degree, second degree, third degree connection, you'll know someone that knows that person. So I've been around even in the recruitment process as not as a recruiter like yourself, but as a delivery expert recruiting resources. And there's a few things that you find. Firstly, is reaching out to your network, and that's how I like to staff a lot of roles because it's proven trusted experience, and you've seen people do the hard yards, and you've seen people learn from their mistakes, and then often get to the outcomes. The second thing is when you're cold reviewing resumes and CVs, within a couple of minutes, you can skim through that resume and you can understand whether a person is fit for purpose. You can understand two main things. So I see some recruiters and some individual respondents, they'll apply for a role and their resume won't match their LinkedIn profile. So they've tailored their resume to the role, and even then it's not really applicable. So you might have a project manager applying for an ABAP role, or you might have an ABAPer applying for a project role, right? Project management role. Not really the first sniff test. And the other sniff test I seem to work on, and not everyone agrees to this one, but it's longevity of roles. If I see that a person has skipped from role to role to role 9 months at a time, I often want to dig a bit deeper, because if you're a good, strong SAP resource, the company that has you typically will want to hold on to you for longer. Unless, of course, you do some stuff like we do at Maintain, and that's project rescue, and we come in and rescue a project for 3 months and 4 months and 5 months and then get out. So definitely longevity is a big one. And then, look, you get through into that interview process, and you can really understand from a person's confidence and a person's experience how they're responding to some technical questions in the SAP domain that you're talking about, how you're responding to other generic questions. So Yeah, it's not too difficult to spot a high caliber resource, I believe, in an SAP. In saying that though, I've probably been burnt a couple of times and picked some people who I thought were great, and then also picked some people who I was happy just to fill the role, and they've exceeded expectations. So
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me. I know we have a small community, but every day we would uncover what we call a gem. It's like, where is that person? They're not on LinkedIn. Only 84%
yeah,
of resources are on LinkedIn. They're not on talent boards. It's come from a referral. And the other thing that resources don't appreciate, I think, is reputation in this market. It's such a small, tight-knit community, and word of mouth travels very, very, very far. So wherever possible, yeah, maintain your reputation. That would be my message to Australia and New Zealand resources.
well, look, I agree. I think integrity is a big part of that. So if you and you sometimes get caught up, right? You get caught up with a commercial challenge that's involved in the project that you're working on. You get caught up with, my fault, your fault type thing. But if you act with integrity at each stage along the way, and if you can justify and stand by that integrity of why you had to make that decision and why you acted the way you did and why the outcome was the outcome, it will always pay off in the long run. So I think that's a key component, is not to drop that integrity just to get yourself through that one little moment in that project, because it will come back to bite you in the past, and you're only as good as your last stuff up. So
That's true. I
yeah,
completely agree. Yeah. And there was this really kind of meaty question that we covered when we were just having a casual conversation a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to touch on because I loved your perspective on this. So we've covered the people and how to get the right people. And then it's like, okay, we can have the right people, but how do we actually get the right project in place? So one issue we've both seen pop up a lot is we'll have the business and IT teams not translating their requirements in depth enough. So how do we mitigate that risk? How do we get them speaking to each other and actually understanding what the business needs, what the IT teams need? And do you ever see, as I'd love your perspective on this, do you ever see technology driving solutions for the sake of tech rather than maybe based on a business need because they haven't properly collaborated?
yeah, it's this is a very meaty, thick question. Yes. So oh, look, I see it a lot that technology professionals want to implement technology to implement technology. And then I also see it on the other side that business professionals want to implement technology because they believe that they are technology experts. And I think the gap between, back to that whole 2005, back in the day, right, there were technology professionals that were implementing on-premise applications. Now in the 2020s, you've got everything that's available to everyone to become glorified experts in that domain. So I do see it a lot that that teams aren't established correctly, roles and responsibilities aren't established correctly when a project has commenced. So once it's gone through all the first question we had is how come they're blocked? So we got through that massive hurdle that the project is now blocked and the project is now underway. And we do often have jostles internal to a project of who's running the project. Is it the technology team? Is it the business team? And there's no right answer to that question. Or I actually believe the right answer is it needs to be a codependent team that has the right leadership, whether or not your business or whether or not your technology shouldn't matter too much. Sure, yes, the business people have greater relationships into the tentacles of the organization to make process related and business decisions, but the technology teams understands the complexity around the cybersecurity protocols and other protocols that aren't quite front and center. But I do often ask that question in interviews as well, is what's your perspective? Should a technology professional run a project, or should a business person run a project?
Ooh,
And I
that's a
also
hard
ask
question. What do they say?
then I ask another question as well, is does the process lead the technology, or does the technology lead the process in design? Again, back in 2005, the process was defined and then you customized the technology to meet the process. But now when you're buying, even SAP, when you're buying SAP, it has a multiple decades of process inbuilt into the technology. So you aren't just buying a technology stack, you're actually buying the process and the technology. And sometimes if you have the right implementer, you have some accelerators and some other components of that. So often the business says the business should run it, and the tech says the tech should run it. And then it's always a fun question to ask. But again, I believe that if you're not establishing your project and setting up your project in the methodology, your project charters correctly, and your project roles and responsibilities, and having the right governance across your project with decision makers and so forth, you often get into that sort of argument. And then I say is, well, as an organisation, shouldn't we be working together to beat our competitors versus fighting internally to actually to try to win internal to the organisation? So I see that a lot as well. We can't get on inside a company, whereas we should be, because then we'd be directly competing with our competitors, not with ourselves. Yeah.
It's a trend that we've seen, but I don't think it's been taken up as in depth as it should. Is it's almost like we need to get a lot more sophisticated with our roles. So it's not enough just to have your standard team anymore. You need business partners, you need advisors, you need those that are translating requirements properly. Your ABAPers now need to be able to speak really well to the business. Oftentimes it's not enough just to code. And I think a lot of roles are changing. It's just a matter of if companies keep up with how quickly the roles are changing.
Yeah, actually, and sorry, going back to the question, because you probably prompted me back online to the question. In my career, I had a decision years and years ago to go down a specialist path or a generalist path. And back then I made a decision to go generalist, so go into sort of project management and project leadership. But I also see now in the market is project specialists are more valuable. So they're more well rewarded, but the divide between the continuum is actually closing. So you can't just be a total generalist and know nothing about the technology anymore, and you can't just be a total specialist and know nothing about how to talk to the business and how to actually tighten it. So I think it's coming more in the center on that continuum versus what it was in the past. So those resources that have amazing functional understanding and amazing technical understanding are the resources that will often shine, because it's the resources that you need when you're in a crunch to solve a problem that cannot just say, well, that's not my issue because I'm the ABAPer, or that's not my issue because I'm the functional guy. It's the person who's able to pull together and pull the team together to make sure they can solve the problem. And the problem in this day and age is never just it's them or us. It's often the we where the problem needs to be solved. So yeah, those soft skills are critical.
That was amazing. Some fantastic insights there. Yeah, especially around the niche versus generalist as well. We always get asked that question, especially with permanent employees looking to go into contracting and vice versa. So yeah, some amazing insights there. One question I have before we wrap up. Obviously you've been in this space a long time and you know some really good people, and who would you like to listen to on this podcast?
Who would I like to listen to? I've got a couple of pretty amazing what I would call mentors, but I don't think we're getting them on this podcast. I think Bill McDermott from SAP Land, back in the day, who now is at ServiceNow, he's an amazing guy. If you haven't read his book, you should go out and get that book. It's called Winner's Dream. Amazing. I gift that book to a lot of people. Yeah, and then there's some other guys in Bill's world that are pretty cool people. I don't know. I'd like to see someone from a system integrator on the panel. I often don't see the bigger system integrators, really contributing in this space. So sometimes it's a bit structured and a bit too corporate. So yeah, I'd like to see any of those industry leads and they don't need to be the C-suites of the integrators, but certainly someone at a senior manager level that it would be great to see. Yeah, and I guess it depends on the topic that you're talking about, but
100%. So one thing we wanted to ask you, because again, we keep seeing so many projects that are hesitant to move forward with S4HANA or not quite sure how to go about it. And you run this amazing company, Maintain. So if you were to walk in as Jonathan Pepper and you've got, an executive that feels stuck with what to do with S4HANA, what steps would you take to help them get to a point where they know how to move forward and they know whether S4HANA is the right decision for them? What would you do?
Yeah, firstly, I'd say it's amazing that they've invited us in at the early stage. So as a part of what we do early, mid, and late stage intervention. So when I draw that out, late stage intervention is firefighting. It's project rescue. Something's gone really bad and we need to fix it. Middle stage intervention is the piece around quality assurance. So design, build, test assurance to make sure that what we built and tested meets the requirements. And then early intervention is exactly that space. So we have within our method, whether it's across early, mid, or late stage intervention, we have different methods to help that process. So we've got a commercial RFX, so whether it's an RFI, RFP process that we help follow if they're at that stage of the process. We've got also implementation proof of concept methodologies for new technologies and implementation proof of concept methodologies for existing technologies. And then we also get to, we've got project assurance and contract assurance methodologies. So we've got a whole range of tools in our toolkit that help unblock what the blocker is. So, I mean, firstly, it's identifying what the blocker is. Is it a commercial blocker? Is it a political blocker? Is it a stalemate between one or two different software providers? So it's a matter of systematically working through those methodologies to get that answer. And really, they should pop you out at the end of that process with a pretty clear direction. Again, depending on what the sticker is or what the blocker is, depends on which one of those methodology we pull out of the toolkit.
Love it.
So tell us a bit more about Maintain, John. How long you've been around, and what do you specialize in?
Yeah, look, I've been around the SAP world for 20 years. And I've been across various organisations. So I worked for Accenture for 10 or so years in system integrator land, worked on the delivery assurance side in Rio Tinto across, global organisation for 10 or so years. Then I moved out. I'm working at a large scale government organisation now as, primary contracts. And as a part of that kind of move out of full-time employment, I moved into building out a consulting, so a technology project assurance company. And delivery excellence company. So that's been around the last 2.5, 3 years. That's been growing, and we've been doing little pieces of work for some clients. But we do the whole spectrum across that early, mid, and late stage, and I try to tie it into that early, mid, and late stage concept because it's pretty easy to comprehend. And typically, a business will come to me with a problem. And how we work is we'll have that first consultation to understand what the problem is and use some of our methodology and tools in our toolkit to sort that out. And we go then through a diagnostic of the situation. So again, spit out a report at the end of it to point the finger at a few key areas that could help resolve the problem. And then after it, we can move into a consulting project, which actually solves the problem, or we can actually bring in some other parties to help with that, whether it's, specialist resource for one area or whether it's big teams of people. And that seems to be working really well for us. Yeah. And primarily SAP, that's where I've cut my teeth in the last year, and that's the technology we love. But not limited to SAP, right? Because not all of the problems in technology projects is in the technology space. There's business problems, there's feature function problems, there's lack of understanding problems, and yeah, so that's it's been fun.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for the insights today, John. That's absolutely fantastic. There's some really good topics there to cover and some insights, especially for resources as well. That was brilliant. And Bethany, thank you again for bringing John on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on, John. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.
Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the Configure It Done podcast.